Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a horror film called Stigmata. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Upon learning about the statue of the Virgin Mary that weeps blood, the Vatican tasks Father Andrew Kiernan to go to Brazil and investigate the phenomenon at the funeral of Father Almeida. Another priest informs him that the statue started crying on the day Father Almeida died, the day the doves came back. The villagers don't appreciate the presence of Father Kiernan there, but he just ignores them and proceeds to collect evidence to prove whether the entire thing is real or not. Then, while doing so, a young boy steals the rosary Father Almeida is holding and sells it to a woman in a marketplace. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, a hairdresser named Frankie Page wakes up to a call after partying all night. Frankie immediately knows that the caller is her mother, and Frankie learns she's in Brazil and that she has a package for her. Moments later, Frankie checks the package and sees a rosary, which her mother got from Belo Quinto. However, Frankie isn't interested in the rosary because she's an atheist, but she suddenly feels nauseous and throws up while examining it. Before going to work, Frankie meets up with her friend, Donna, and tells her she might be pregnant. She's worried about bringing a person into the world, but Donna reminds her she has options. On the other hand, Father Kiernan returns to Vatican City and studies the photos of the Weeping Virgin Mary statue with Cardinal Houseman. Then, Father Kiernan shows the Cardinal the lab report confirming that the blood from the statue is human blood, telling him there's no scientific explanation for it. However, as it turns out, Father Kiernan's original task was to investigate the appearance of the Virgin Mary on the side of a building. Father Kiernan then explains that it's just an oxidation stain caused by rainwater running down untreated sidewalls, and he only investigated the statue because he heard about it in Sao Paulo. Unfortunately, the Cardinal isn't interested in that and just focuses on the image of the Virgin Mary on the wall, saying they'll now close the case. Despite that, Father Kiernan hopes to return to Belo Quinto because he wants to do some more tests on the statue. But sadly, Cardinal Houseman doesn't allow him and says they'll just send a geologist there to see if the statue really needs more tests. Then, the Cardinal instructs Father Dario to get all the information on the church in Belo Quinto. Back in Pittsburgh, Frankie is attacked by an unseen force in the bathtub. She then feels excruciating pain in her wrists, and when she looks at them, she realizes they're bleeding. Moments later, Frankie is rushed to the hospital by Donna and gets her wounds immediately treated. The doctor says her wounds are caused by the entry of a sharp object, thinking that they're self-inflicted. However, Frankie denies it and says she'd never harm herself, pointing out that she's happy with her life. Later that night, Frankie returns home with Donna and sees the mess she accidentally made in the bathroom. Then, Frankie asks Donna if she smells some flowers as she's about to sleep, saying it's like jasmine or hyacinth, but her friend doesn't smell anything. Meanwhile, Father Kiernan talks to Father Delmonico about his job investigating miracles around the world and says he doesn't know what he's doing. Then, Father Kiernan asks Father Delmonico about the gospel he's translating, but he can't say much about it because he was only given the third page. According to Father Delmonico, the most sensitive documents are always divided into three, 1/3 each to the Dominicans, Franciscans, and Jesuits. He also adds that the truth of any document is only known to a very powerful few, making Father Kiernan realize that the Vatican keeps many secrets. On the other hand, Frankie gets distracted at work when she sees a woman holding a baby across the street. Then, she panics and runs to the street when the woman drops the infant, almost causing a vehicular accident. However, Frankie doesn't find the baby and the lady is gone too. So, Donna decides to take her home, seeing that she's too distraught. While on the subway that night, Frankie suddenly becomes hostile upon seeing a priest and asks the man if he's Andrew Kiernan. However, when the priest tells her that he's not, Frankie grabs a nun's crucifix and throws it away. Then, everyone gets thrown inside the train when it suddenly runs wild, and as Frankie tries to maintain her balance, an unseen force repeatedly whips her on the back. Because of that, Frankie has to be rushed to the hospital again, and once she gets treated, she learns she's not pregnant. After undergoing a series of tests, Frankie is informed by her doctor that she has epilepsy. Then, the priest from the train, Father Durning, gives Frankie his card as she's about to leave the hospital, telling her to call him so they can talk about Stigmata. Meanwhile, Father Kiernan learns from Father Dario that they have no record of a church in Belo Quinto. Cardinal Houseman says there's no record of a priest there either. Then he shows Father Kiernan the footage of the subway accident. The Cardinal also reads Father Durning's report on it, saying the woman was repeatedly whipped by an unseen force. However, Father Kiernan isn't even sure if the case is that important, but Cardinal Houseman has already decided to send him to Pittsburgh to investigate. Days later, Father Kiernan arrives in the US and visits Frankie at her workplace, simply asking for a trim. Then, when Father Kiernan tells Frankie his name, she says she's been expecting him. So, the two go to a diner and continue their conversation, and that's when Father Kiernan finds out that Frankie doesn't believe in God. The priest then explains that stigmatics are deeply religious people, adding that Christ died on the cross with 5 wounds. Christ's back was scourged with whips, and there were gashes in his forehead from a crown of thorns. Also, nails were driven through his hands and feet, and a spear was driven through his side. While Father Kiernan is explaining all this, Frankie's wounds start bleeding. Then, after listening to Father Kiernan about how people get stigmata, Frankie decides to show him her wounds and asks what he thinks. However, the priest says it's not a case for the church because to say that a self-proclaimed atheist exhibits the wounds of Christ is a contradiction in terms. Frustrated, Frankie shows the priest a letter she doesn't remember writing, which is in Italian. The letter says, "Split a piece of wood and I'm there. Lift a stone and you will find me." Father Kiernan finds the letter beautiful, but Frankie thinks otherwise and says it's a warning. Frankie now believes that she can't escape whatever's happening to her, no matter what she does, so she just leaves Father Kiernan. That night, Frankie reads several books to figure out what's happening to her, but she only gets more upset. So she goes to a club and talks to Donna, telling her friend that God is ruining her life. Frankie just can't understand why she'd have holes through her wrists and slashes across her back. But Donna thinks she's starting to lose her mind. However, as she prepares to leave, Frankie suddenly feels excruciating pain in her head. Frankie panics as her head bleeds and feels as if she's being pricked with thorns, but nobody dares to help her except for Donna. Scared, Frankie runs outside and eventually comes across Father Kiernan. However, she suddenly bolts and hides in an alleyway where the priest feels as if a dark force is surrounding him. Then, Father Kiernan soon finds Frankie carving strange symbols on a car's hood using a broken bottle. Because of that, Father Kiernan takes out his recorder and that's when Frankie shouts at him in a different language, before finally collapsing when Donna arrives. After that, Father Kiernan takes Frankie to Father Durning's church and tends to her wounds. Then, Father Kiernan lets Frankie rest and calls Father Delmonico, asking the linguist to translate an audio file for him. Moments later, Frankie wanders around the church and stops in front of the altar, comparing her wounds to Christ's. It isn't long before Father Kiernan finds her there, so she tells the priest she can't have stigmata because Christ was crucified through his palms while her wounds are through the wrists. However, Father Kiernan reveals that the crucifix is inaccurate because scientists have discovered that in Roman times, people were crucified through the wrists, not the palms. At the same time, Father Kiernan informs Frankie that the words she shouted were Aramaic, a dialect used in Galilee around the time of Jesus. The next day, Father Kiernan finds Frankie in her apartment writing symbols on the wall. So, he once again takes out his recorder and camera, but Frankie gets distracted when he starts taking pictures. At this point, Father Kiernan realizes that Frankie is being possessed and asks who's in her body. Then, Frankie turns around and speaks in a man's voice in a different language, telling the priest that the messenger is not important. After that, Frankie continues to write on the wall, and she soon stops and lies down on the bed. Seconds later, water suddenly starts dripping on Frankie's face from the ceiling, and that's when she comes back to her senses. She then tells Father Kiernan that it smells like flowers there, and she gets surprised when she sees what she wrote on the wall. Meanwhile, Cardinal Houseman wonders why Father Kiernan hasn't called him yet. Then, after seeing newspaper clippings from their office in Pennsylvania that mention stigmata, he instructs Father Dario to have Father Kiernan conclude his investigation and report to him in New York the following week. On the other hand, Frankie gets mad at Father Kiernan when he asks her about the writings on the wall, telling the priest she doesn't know what they mean and just wants her life back. Upset, Frankie leaves the apartment to buy some flowers, and Father Kiernan follows her to apologize. Then, they have a few drinks as Father Kiernan shares with Frankie his life as an organic chemist before becoming a priest. However, while they're talking, Frankie suddenly feels intense pain in her feet and starts bleeding, eventually losing her balance as Father Kiernan tries to help her. After that, Father Kiernan tends to Frankie's wounds in her apartment. Frankie then asks about the fifth wound of Christ, thinking she's about to have it, so the priest says it's the spear. However, he assures Frankie that no stigmatic has ever received the full 5 wounds. Then, he tells her about the pilgrimage he made to a small village in the mountains of southern Italy, where he met Padre Pio. According to Father Kiernan, Padre Pio received the wounds when he was 23 years of age, the same age as Saint Francis of Assisi, the first person to receive the stigmata in the 13th century. Frankie then asks if Padre Pio's wounds were as bad as hers, so Father Kiernan reveals that aside from losing a pint of blood in a day, he also suffered terrible demonic attacks. Father Kiernan says all stigmatics suffer the most intense spiritual conflict, and the odor of sanctity or the smell of flowers accompany the wounds. Curious, Frankie asks how many wounds Padre Pio received, and when Father Kiernan says he got 2, she realizes she's dying. Later on, Father Kiernan sends Father Delmonico the pictures of Frankie's writings. However, Father Delmonico warns him not to send any more photos, telling him that the writings say, "The kingdom of God is inside you and all about you." Because of that, Father Delmonico advises Father Kiernan to forget he saw the writings, suddenly bringing up how the Gospel Commission was closed down by Cardinal Houseman. Father Delmonico says that years ago they discovered a document that looked like a completely new gospel. It was written entirely in Aramaic and it may be Jesus' actual words. However, their conversation is cut short when Father Dario arrives, forcing Father Delmonico to delete all the pictures from the computer before leaving. Unfortunately, Father Dario still manages to retrieve the pictures and shows them to Cardinal Houseman, informing him that Father Kiernan emailed them to Father Delmonico. On the other hand, Father Delmonico calls his friend, Marion Petrocelli, in New York and tells him that the missing Gospel of Jesus has turned up, also mentioning Father Alameda and Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, Father Kiernan sees in one of his pictures that there's someone else in the room with him and Frankie. He then goes straight to Frankie's apartment and sees that she painted the wall to cover her writings. Then, Frankie flirts with Father Kiernan and kisses him, but the priest manages to control himself before anything happens. Pissed, Frankie starts getting violent and pushes Father Kiernan around, making him realize that she's being possessed again. Frankie continues to attack Father Kiernan and even throws him across the room, eventually taking a knife to threaten the priest and mock him. However, instead of hurting Father Kiernan, the possessed Frankie repeatedly cuts her arm and stabs her wrist. Then, Frankie collapses on the bed and that's when she starts to levitate. Shocked, Father Kiernan watches while Frankie floats as if she's crucified on the cross, and then she starts weeping blood. So, Father Kiernan reaches for Frankie and takes her down, making sure she's still breathing. Moments later, Father Kiernan prays while watching over sleeping Frankie. Then, Frankie wakes up and asks Father Kiernan to join her in bed, and the two just lie down there while trying to comfort each other. At the same time, Cardinal Houseman and Father Dario arrive with Father Durning at Frankie's apartment. They then take Frankie to the archdiocese, where two nuns tend to her wounds. Meanwhile, Father Kiernan leaves Frankie's rosary on the bedside table. Moments later, Cardinal Houseman talks to Father Kiernan about Frankie's writings, thinking the priest is hiding something from him. He then decides to take over Frankie's case and orders Father Kiernan to get some rest, but Father Kiernan refuses to leave Frankie alone. However, the Cardinal points out that Father Kiernan is in no state to help anyone at the moment, telling him he's exhausted. Defeated, Father Kiernan asks why the Cardinal is so concerned with the photos, so Cardinal Houseman admits that Father Delmonico showed them to him because he thought they were important. But when Father Kiernan asks if they have something to do with the Gospel Commission, Cardinal Houseman says he doesn't know. Later on, Father Kiernan returns to Father Durning's church, where Petrocelli finds him. The man then tells Father Kiernan that the writings are part of Jesus Christ's Gospel, pointing out that they were his own words. However, some factions in the Vatican believe that the document could destroy the authority of the modern church. According to Petrocelli, the Gospel reveals Christ's instructions to his disciples on how to continue his church after his death. Then, when Father Alameda, Petrocelli, and Father Delmonico gave their initial conclusions to the Gospel Commission, Cardinal Houseman ordered them to stop immediately. However, Father Alameda refused and stole the document to translate it alone. Because of that, Petrocelli and Father Alameda were excommunicated, and Petrocelli doesn't know where he is. Petrocelli also shows Father Kiernan his picture with Father Alameda and Father Delmonico, and that's when Father Kiernan reveals that Father Alameda is already dead. After that, Petrocelli says that the true Church of Christ is not in buildings but everyone's hearts. Then, Petrocelli recites the first words in the Gospel of Christ, which are exactly what Frankie wrote on the wall. At the same time, he reveals that Father Alameda used to wear gloves to cover the marks of the stigmata, making Father Kiernan realize that that's why Frankie has the stigmata too. Frankie is just Father Alameda's messenger, and Petrocelli tells him that Cardinal Houseman will never let that gospel out. Meanwhile, Cardinal Houseman and Father Dario begin Frankie's exorcism, but the woman is too strong for them. So, the Cardinal instructs Father Dario and the nuns to leave while he tries to strangle Frankie. On the other hand, Father Kiernan rushes to the archdiocese to save Frankie. Moments later, Father Kiernan finally arrives and stops the Cardinal from killing Frankie, telling him he already knows everything he's done and he will pay for them. Then, Father Kiernan enters Frankie's room just as it gets consumed by fire, directly addressing Father Alameda to make him his messenger. However, Father Alameda speaks through Frankie and tells Father Kiernan that a messenger has faith. So, Father Kiernan walks through the fire and starts to pray, asking Father Alameda to leave Frankie's body. Then, Father Alameda's soul eventually departs and Father Kiernan takes Frankie out of the burning room. A few minutes later, Father Kiernan sits outside with Frankie and tells her not to go, prompting her to kiss him. Then, after some time, Father Kiernan returns to Belo Quinto and finds the original documents for Christ's Gospel hidden in Father Alameda's church. Just as the movie ends, it is revealed that the Gospel of St. Thomas was discovered in Nag Hammadi, and scholars have claimed it to be the closest record we have of the word of the historical Jesus. However, the Vatican refuses to recognize it and considers it heresy.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.